Hi there and welcome to Z Online School. In this video we're talking about the structure and function of the kidney. We're dedicated to tell you about the structure and the function of the kidney by first letting you know about the urinary system, then talking about the structure of the kidney, how the nephrons work, and at the end of this video we've got study tips for those who want to handle questions and excretion smarter. What are we talking about when we talk about the urinary system? Well, the urinary system is just that group of organs that work together to get rid of toxic metabolic wastes in the body. This is the system that makes the process of excretion possible, and therefore it's sometimes called the excretory system. Here's a picture that shows the organs of the urinary system. The vena cava is a part in the urinary system which is a blood vessel. It takes blood towards the heart. The renal vein is another blood vessel in the urinary system. It's very essential as it gets that blood that has been used in the kidneys and takes it towards the vena cava for it to be taken towards the heart. Then we have the ureter. The ureter collects urine. This urine has been already made in the kidneys and now it's been directed towards the bladder where it will be stored. The aorta is another blood vessel found in the urinary system. It brings blood towards the kidneys. The blood is taken towards the kidneys using the renal artery that has been shown there in the label. It takes the blood into the kidney for those metabolic wastes to be taken out of it. The kidney is the place where we have nephrons which carry out this process of excretion. Like we said, the bladder is that organ that stores the urine after it has been made in the kidneys. This is an elastic organ and therefore it's able sometimes to hold up to 2 cups of urine. The urethra is another part of the urinary system. This is the passage through which urine gets excreted out of the body. In this diagram, we also have some muscles that are very essential. Muscles called the sphincter muscles. These muscles enable the closing and opening of the passage called the urethra. So they control the flow of urine out of the body. Without these muscles, we wouldn't have been able to control the flow of urine out of the body. That means urine could have been just coming out anytime. But thanks to the sphincter muscles, how are the kidneys structured? We're going to first look at the main parts of the kidney which you should always remember, then look at some other parts that you should also know. There are basically 4 main parts. The outermost part, which is known as the renal capsule, which is made up of fibrous tissue that protect the inside of the kidney. We've also got the cortex, which has been indicated in this red region. The cortex is a group of tissues. Then we also have another layer that is called the medulla. The medulla is a layer of renal pyramids. In short, this is the region where we find renal pyramids. Renal pyramids are these triangular structures we are seeing in the diagram. The fourth part that you should always remember is the renal pelvis. This is the part where all the major calyces get joined. Of course, there are other parts like the capillaries, the arteriole, the venule, but these are just small parts. The arterioles are just branches of the renal artery. The venules are just branches of the renal vein. The capillaries are further branches of the arterioles and the venules. This is where blood gets into the nephron and out of the nephron. Other parts include the minor calyces, which are the parts that are joined to the renal pyramid, meaning the minor calyces are the parts through which urine passes and gets into the major calyces, and then from the major calyces it gets into the renal pelvis, where it's destined to get into the ureter. How do nephrons work? Well, before we get into how nephrons work, we should understand one thing. Nephrons are the functional unit of a kidney. This means that this is where the removal of the toxic metabolic waste occurs. Before we also look at how the nephrons work, it's very essential to know where these nephrons are located. A diagram here has been shown. Let's look at the diagram on the left side. You can see on the top of the diagram we've got the label nephron. The nephron is that structure with some blue, reddish, and yellow structures identical with the diagram on the right. You can see the nephron is located just in between the cortex and the medulla. So when you're asked to state the location of the nephron, just say it's a structure found in between the cortex and the medulla, and you'll be fine with that. Now, knowing the location of the nephron is not enough. We need to know how it works. And in excretion, that's mainly what you want to know, how the nephrons work. There are quite a number of nephrons in the kidney, but this is the structure of one nephron drawn. We're going to do this for us to understand how it works. We're going to get most of these parts that have been drawn here and explain how they enable the nephron to work. So we're going to talk about the afferent arteriole first, and then lastly we're going to talk about the collecting duct. The afferent arteriole is just a blood vessel that brings blood towards the nephrons. The efferent arteriole is the opposite of the afferent arteriole. You can see that the afferent arteriole is wide while the efferent arteriole is narrow. This is for one reason, to increase the pressure in this capillary of networks that they are calling the glomerulus. In the glomerulus, there's one process that takes place. It's known as ultrafiltration. What happens in ultrafiltration is just this simple thing. Substances that are needed to be worked on are filtered out of blood and then get into the Bowman's capsule. These substances include water, salts, urea, and glucose, and they are collectively known as the glomerular filtrate. Once they get into the Bowman's capsule, their destination is the proximal convoluted tube. It might be sometimes abbreviated as the PCT, but in this lesson, I'll be trying to state it in full. In the proximal convoluted tubule, this is where a process of reabsorption takes place. To reabsorb just simply means these substances will be taken back into the body depending on their concentration in blood. In the proximal convoluted tubule is where we have our first reabsorption. And because only some substances are reabsorbed into the body, the kind of reabsorption that takes place here is called selective reabsorption. The main substance that is needed to be reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule is the glucose. However, some small amounts of water and salts are also reabsorbed. After the glucose and small amounts of water and salts have been reabsorbed into the body, the remaining substance continues its journey into the loop of Henle. In this loop, one main thing that is reabsorbed is water. What I want you to notice is that from the proximal convoluted tubule to the distal convoluted tubule and partially the collecting duct, what happens here is selective reabsorption. Now, when we're in the loop of Henle, there's a special kind of reabsorption that happens, and it's termed osmoregulation. We'll talk about osmoregulation more under the study tips section. So make sure you stay around and reach that part because we've got a lot of information for you there today. So in the loop of Henle, as we have said, water is reabsorbed in the body depending on whether blood contains a lot of water or not. After some water has been reabsorbed, in the distal convoluted tubule, salts are mainly reabsorbed into the body. This is to balance the blood volume and blood pressure. After that, mainly what remains to be reabsorbed is just water. So in the collecting duct, we have small amounts of water being reabsorbed. After which, the substance formed will be now urine, ready to be transported to the bladder where it will be stored and later excreted out of the body. This is how the nephrons work. You might ask yourself what these other branches in the collecting duct are for. Well, these other branches are connections to other nephrons, as the collecting duct is connected to many nephrons. One might be connected to at least 5 nephrons. We've talked about a lot. Now let's summarize what we've talked about in the nephrons. The nephrons have got 5 processes. The first one, which is ultrafiltration, we said this process is where particular substances get filtered out of blood and then form a glomerular filtrate, which later gets into the proximal convoluted tubule. And in the proximal convoluted tubule, we've got the first selective reabsorption, where glucose is mainly reabsorbed back into blood. Then after this process, we've got osmoregulation, where the water levels are balanced. If there's little water in the blood, then water will be reabsorbed. If there's a lot of water in the blood, then no water will be reabsorbed. The second last is the second selective reabsorption, where we've got salts being reabsorbed and some water being reabsorbed together with the salts. In the collecting duct, this is where the substance urine gets ready for secretion. You must note that in the collecting duct, sometimes water may be reabsorbed also. Now, let's get to our study tips section. Today we've got a lot of tips that you should always remember when handling the topic of excretion. The first tip is about the information that is communicated in the colors of urine. You should know that the color of your urine can indicate disease or can indicate dehydration of your body. In the first picture that has showed up here is the color of a normal hydrated body. It's usually transparent yellow, or as they call it in biology, a pale straw color. If you are just a bit dehydrated, your urine might get a deeper shade of yellow, while if you are very dehydrated or have a liver problem, your urine will look brownish in color. So when you see brown urine, don't hesitate to see a medical personnel. Now, we've also got the last kind of urine that someone might excrete, which is urine with blood. This urine usually indicates that someone has got a disease. Make sure you know what each of these 4 kinds of urine indicate. Another tip we have for you today is about answering a question that usually comes when you're talking about excretion. This is a question asking you to explain the role of the kidney in excretion. How do you go about this question? The first thing you should think about is what is excreted by the kidney. As we may know, excretion mainly involves the urinary system, and excretion is the process by which toxic metabolic wastes are removed from the body. So what is excreted is basically metabolic waste. Since we know it's metabolic waste, now we need to ask ourselves what kinds of metabolic wastes are excreted via the kidney. If you've been watching our videos to learn excretion, you should know by now that the metabolic wastes are urea, excess water, and excess salts. That brings us to the last thing you should note when answering this question: the excreta involved in excreting these metabolic wastes. With this, we're ready to form at least an explanation you can use to answer such a question if you encountered it. The role of the kidney is to excrete toxic metabolic waste from the body. Excess water, excess salts, and urea are the main metabolic wastes from the body. After ultrafiltration, selective reabsorption, and osmoregulation, these wastes form a substance called urine. Urine is then passed out of the body. This is a passage you can use to answer this question. It's just an example. You can take it further and explain even more details. Confusing the digestive system and the excretory system, thinking they both do the same thing, is a mistake you might make one of the times, or is a mistake one of the students can make. These two systems are different by their structure and by how they work. Here's a table that shows you the major differences between the excretory system and the digestive system. The first thing is that their purpose is different. The excretory system's main job is to maintain chemical composition and the volume of blood, while the digestive system absorbs nutrients from food that we take and has been broken down. The excretory system works on blood, while the digestive system works on food. It's also very essential to look at the states of the excreta that is involved in both systems. The excretory system excretes its waste as liquid, while the digestive system excretes its waste as a semi-solid. These are some major differences between these two systems and can help you differentiate them once you get confused. Earlier in this lesson, we talked about osmoregulation, and I said under the study tips section, we'll be looking at more about this process. Osmoregulation is the regulation of the water levels in blood. This happens through this hormone called Antidiuretic Hormone. It's a hormone produced by the pituitary gland. In the diagram, we can see where the pituitary gland is located, which is in the brain. Now, how does osmoregulation get affected by antidiuretic hormone? It happens like this. As blood is passing through the pituitary gland, this gland senses the water concentration in blood. After it senses the water concentration in blood, it checks if it's low. Let's say in this case it was low. What happens is that the pituitary gland will secrete this hormone called antidiuretic hormone. You should also note that this hormone may also be referred to as vasopressin, so when that term is used, don't get confused. The ADH will later be transported via blood to the kidneys, where they will affect the reabsorption in the loop of Henle. If the water concentrations are low, just like we are imagining, what will happen is that the loop of Henle will begin to reabsorb more water in the body. And because of this, what happens to the concentration of the urine is that it becomes more concentrated because there's less water in it. If, however, there was a lot of water in the blood, what would happen is that the pituitary gland won't secrete any antidiuretic hormone. This is because there's enough water in the body, and therefore no more water is needed. These are the cases where we see urine is less concentrated and very lightly colored. The last study tip for today is talking about reabsorption and the hormone aldosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone produced by the adrenal gland. Specifically, it's produced in the cortex of this gland. This hormone specifically enhances the diastoconvoluted tubule for reabsorption of the salts and water, and sometimes it may also affect the collecting duct, where the collecting duct will absorb some water. The purpose of this hormone is to control the volume of blood and the blood pressure. When the blood pressure is low, what happens is that the adrenal gland will secrete aldosterone, which will increase the reabsorption of salts. Mostly when reabsorbing salts, the sodium ions are reabsorbed into the body. And when the blood volume is low, aldosterone will cause reabsorption in the diastoconvoluted tubule and collecting duct for more water. So basically what happens here is this in summary. When blood pressure is low, more salts will be reabsorbed. When blood volume is low, both salts and the water will be absorbed to increase the blood volume. Thanks for reaching till the end of this video. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel if you haven't yet subscribed, or sharing this video to those people you think it might be helpful. See you in the next video.